Rachel Moore never imagined that a normal Tuesday morning would erase 17 years of marriage. She stood in the kitchen, still wearing her old college sweatshirt, listening to the quiet hum of the coffee machine while her phone buzzed again. A bank notification flashed on the screen. Account balance, 0. She refreshed it, confused, then checked another account. Also 0. Her hands began to shake. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his tablet, calm, detached, almost bored. He didn't look up when Rachel asked, softly at first, then louder, what had happened to their money. He simply said, "It's handled," and took a sip of coffee. That was when Rachel noticed the folder beside him. Property documents. Her name was missing. She reached for the papers. Daniel stopped her with one finger. "They're not yours anymore," he said, voice flat. "I transferred everything to Vanessa. It's cleaner this way." He spoke like a man discussing weather, not a life he was destroying. Rachel felt heat rush to her face, then cold. This house, the savings, the business shares, everything she had helped build while putting her own career aside, was gone. Her chest tightened, not just from fear, but from humiliation. She had trusted him completely. Daniel finally looked at her then, eyes hard. "You'll sign the divorce papers today," he said. "If you don't, things will get very unpleasant." He stood, grabbed his keys, and paused at the door. "You should be grateful I'm being generous." The door closed. The silence roared. Rachel slowly sank into a chair, staring at the empty screen of her phone, realizing this wasn't an argument or a mistake. It felt deliberate, cruel, irreversible, final, and carefully calculated. It was the moment she understood her husband had planned her erasure for years. Rachel Moore had not always been a dependent woman waiting for permission. In her 20s, she was driven, organized, and respected. She worked as an operations coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm in Ohio, managing contracts, payroll schedules, and vendor negotiations with quiet confidence. Colleagues trusted her judgment. Supervisors relied on her memory. She was the kind of employee who noticed problems before they became disasters. Daniel entered her life during that steady season. He admired her discipline, praised her intelligence, and told her she made him feel capable. When he proposed, he promised partnership, not control. After marriage, the changes came slowly, disguised as care. He suggested she quit her job when his income increased, saying stress was bad for her health. He offered to handle finances so she could rest. Rachel believed love meant compromise. Years passed. Rachel became the invisible engine of the household. She managed appointments, taxes, family obligations, and emotional labor, while Daniel focused on growth and status. Whenever she asked about investments or savings, Daniel smiled and said everything was under control. He called her his anchor, his support, his safety. She didn't realize anchors are meant to stay submerged. Friends drifted away. Daniel disliked their questions and joked they were jealous. Rachel stopped calling them back. Her world narrowed to her home, her husband, and the belief that loyalty would eventually be rewarded. She ignored the quiet discomfort that surfaced whenever documents were signed without explanation. The truth was, Rachel had slowly surrendered authority piece by piece, mistaking trust for security. She had given Daniel access to everything, including herself, without safeguards. By the time she sensed imbalance, she was already standing on unstable ground. Sitting alone after Daniel left, Rachel finally understood that her past obedience was not kindness, but conditioning. And for the first time, she wondered what else he had trained her not to question, and what other parts of her life had already been quietly stolen. What she did not know yet was that the smallest forgotten detail would soon become Daniel's greatest mistake of his life forever. Looking back, Rachel could trace the betrayal through small moments she once dismissed. Daniel had always insisted on handling paperwork alone. He said numbers stressed her out, that she trusted him, didn't she? When envelopes arrived marked urgent, he opened them first. When she asked questions, he kissed her forehead and changed the subject. Over time, silence became routine. Vanessa's presence had been another warning. Daniel's half-sister appeared suddenly, always needing help, always lingering too long. She spoke sweetly to Rachel but never met her eyes. When Rachel suggested boundaries, Daniel accused her of being insecure. "She's family," he said. You should try harder. Rachel tried. She always tried. There were nights Daniel stayed out late claiming meetings. There were calls he took outside. There were passwords changed and shared calendars erased. Rachel noticed, then doubted herself. Daniel had mastered that. He framed her concerns as emotional, irrational, ungrateful. Slowly, she learned that peace came from not asking. One afternoon, years earlier, Rachel had almost insisted on reviewing a refinancing document. Daniel laughed and said, "Do you really want to deal with that boring stuff?" She backed down, embarrassed for caring. That signature would later haunt her. At the time, it felt like trust. Now, it felt like surrender. Rachel realized the manipulation hadn't been loud. It was gentle, constant, and strategic. Daniel never raised his voice. He reshaped reality instead. Each time she questioned him, he rewrote the story until she questioned herself. That was how control worked. Not with force, but with comfort. Sitting in the quiet house, Rachel felt anger rise beneath the shock, not just toward Daniel, but toward herself. She had seen the cracks. She had sensed the imbalance. She had chosen harmony over truth, and now the cost was everything she owned and everything she thought she was. Yet buried beneath regret was something new, awareness. Rachel understood now that what had been taken could not have disappeared without planning, which meant there had to be records, trails, mistakes. No one who controlled everything ever did so perfectly. As the sun set through the living room window, Rachel picked up her phone and opened her email archive, scrolling back years with shaking hands. Somewhere in that digital past was proof Daniel believed no one would ever look for. Vanessa Cole arrived at the house that evening without knocking, heels clicking confidently against the floor Rachel had scrubbed for years. She smiled wide, almost cheerful, as if nothing unusual had happened. In her hand was a leather folder identical to Daniel's. Rachel immediately understood this was not coincidence. This was coordination. Vanessa spoke first, her tone soft but sharp underneath. She said the transfer was temporary, a protective move suggested by Daniel. Markets were unstable, lawsuits unpredictable. Everything was safer under Vanessa's name, she claimed. Rachel noticed she never said everything would be returned. Not once. When Rachel asked why no one told her, Vanessa shrugged lightly. She said Rachel had always been sensitive, that stress made her unreliable. The words landed with precision, rehearsed and cruel. Vanessa wasn't improvising. She had practiced this conversation, probably with Daniel, probably many times. Rachel remembered their first meeting years ago. Vanessa had hugged Daniel tightly and barely touched Rachel. From that day forward, she treated Rachel like an outsider who had wandered into someone else's life. Compliments always carried hidden insults. Help always came with judgment. Rachel now saw it clearly. Vanessa had never wanted a sister. She wanted access. As the conversation continued, Vanessa leaned back, crossing her legs, scanning the room like it already belonged to her. She commented on the furniture, the location, the rising value of the neighborhood. She spoke like an investor, not family. Rachel's stomach twisted as realization settled in. This wasn't just about control, it was about ownership. Then Vanessa said something that shattered the last illusion. She told Rachel that Daniel had been planning this for years, ever since Rachel's health started declining. He needed options, Vanessa said calmly. You understand? In that moment, Rachel saw the full shape of the betrayal. Her marriage wasn't ending because of failure or distance. It was ending because she had become inconvenient. Vanessa stood up, smoothed her jacket, and smiled again. She told Rachel to be practical, to move on quietly. After Vanessa left, Rachel locked the door and slid down against it, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was sharp. The enemy now had a face, a voice, and a weakness. Fear hardened into focus, patience, and determination. Vanessa believed this victory was permanent, and that belief would soon destroy her completely. Rachel sat across from Daniel's attorney the next afternoon, hands folded, spine straight, pretending strength she did not feel. The office smelled like leather and money. Framed awards lined the walls, reminding her who power usually favored. Daniel was not there. He did not need to be. The attorney spoke calmly, sliding papers toward her. He explained that Daniel had already filed for divorce and was requesting an expedited process. According to the documents, Rachel had no claim to the house, the savings, or the business interests. Everything had been legally transferred months ago. Fighting it would be costly, public, and exhausting. Rachel asked one question: how would she live? The attorney adjusted his glasses and said Daniel was offering a transition allowance for 3 months. After that, she would be responsible for herself. His tone suggested generosity, not cruelty. When Rachel mentioned her medical condition, the attorney paused briefly, then said the insurance was no longer active under Daniel's plan. She could apply for assistance on her own. Rachel felt the room tilt. This was not negotiation. It was removal. The papers demanded her signature within 48 hours. If she refused, Daniel would pursue claims that Rachel had been financially unstable and emotionally unreliable. The attorney implied character witnesses were ready. The message was clear. Resistance would mean humiliation. Rachel walked out of the office into the bright parking lot, clutching a folder that weighed more than her body. Cars passed. People laughed. The world continued, indifferent. She sat in her car and stared ahead, realizing she had been cornered perfectly. That night, Rachel opened her laptop and read the documents again. Line by line, clause by clause, her name erased, replaced, dismissed. She understood now that Daniel was not trying to end a marriage. He was trying to erase a person. As midnight passed, fear gave way to something colder: clarity. If this was war, then silence would be her shield. She signed nothing. She cried quietly, wiped her face, and began preparing for a future Daniel believed she was too broken to imagine. What Daniel mistook for surrender was the beginning of a calculation he would never survive. Every breath she took reminded her that survival was still possible, and that patience, not rage, would decide who walked away, ruined in the end when the truth finally surfaced publicly. By the end of the week, Rachel realized Daniel had moved faster than fear. Her phone stopped ringing. Messages went unanswered. Friends she had known for years suddenly felt distant, cautious, unsure how to speak to her. Daniel had been busy while she was silent. She learned the truth through a single forwarded email. Daniel had contacted several people from their shared circle, expressing concern about Rachel's mental state. He wrote that stress had made her unstable, that the divorce was necessary for everyone's safety. The language was polished, sympathetic, convincing. No one questioned it. The cruelest blow came through her son, Mark, from her first marriage. He texted that Daniel thought it was best they limit contact for now. Daniel said Rachel needed space to heal. Mark was confused, worried, and obedient. Rachel stared at the message, feeling something tear inside her chest. Without income, without insurance, and without support, Rachel packed what she could fit into her car. She left the house before Daniel returned, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of watching her leave. She drove until the familiar streets disappeared, then parked behind a grocery store and slept upright, keys in her hand. The next morning, pain woke her before the sun. Her body reminded her that illness did not pause for heartbreak. She sat in the driver's seat, breathing slowly, realizing how completely she had been cut off. This was not just divorce, it was isolation by design. Yet even in that moment, something unexpected happened. With nothing left to manage or maintain, Rachel felt the weight of obedience lift. There was no one left to please, no image to protect. The fear remained, but beneath it was freedom, sharp and unfamiliar. She opened her phone and searched for old files, old numbers, old accounts she had once controlled. There were fragments of a life Daniel had not fully erased, small, overlooked pieces he assumed she would never need again. Rachel leaned her head against the steering wheel and whispered a promise to herself. She would survive this, not loudly, not dramatically, but thoroughly. And when the truth finally surfaced, it would not be through anger, but through evidence he never imagined she still possessed, hidden quietly where no one else had ever thought to look. Daniel believed he had isolated her completely, but he pushed her toward the one thing that could destroy him. Rain tapped against the windshield as Rachel sat alone in the hospital parking garage, engine off, lights dark. She had come for blood work she could barely afford, then stayed long after the nurses left. The building loomed silent, indifferent to her fear. Her phone lay face down on the seat, empty of messages, empty of concern. Her body ached deeply that night. Fatigue pressed into her bones, and the diagnosis echoed in her mind like a warning she could no longer ignore. She imagined how easy it would be to stop fighting, to close her eyes, let the cold settle, let the noise finally end. No lawyers, no betrayal, no future to solve. Rachel rested her forehead on the steering wheel and cried without sound. She mourned the life she gave away, the years she spent believing love required disappearance. She whispered apologies to the woman she used to be, the one who trusted, who planned, who dreamed small and safe. For a moment she considered driving nowhere, just sitting until morning, until someone noticed, until something changed without her effort. The thought frightened her more than death itself. Waiting had already cost her everything. That was when she noticed the van parked 2 spaces away, an older model, dented, lived in. A light flicked on inside. The door opened slowly and a woman stepped out, wrapped in a worn coat. She looked at Rachel, not with pity, but recognition. The woman asked if Rachel was okay. The question was simple, unguarded. Rachel tried to answer and failed. Words collapsed into tears. The woman nodded, as if she understood exactly, and handed Rachel a cup of coffee from a thermos without asking anything in return. They stood in silence, rain echoing around them. In that quiet, something shifted. Rachel realized she did not want to disappear. She wanted to be seen, just once, without judgment or demand. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn. Rachel said her name, too, voice trembling but alive. In that parking garage, between strangers, Rachel chose to stay. She did not know this chance meeting would become the reason her story did not end there. Hope returned quietly, fragile yet stubborn, planting a future she could not see, but would one day defend with courage, patience, truth, and an unbreakable will against betrayal, fear, silence, and cruelty. Evelyn did not ask Rachel for details. She did not ask why she was alone or why her hands shook when she held the coffee cup. She simply said the hospital parking garage was not a safe place to spend the night and offered a quiet alternative. Her van was parked nearby, warm, clean, and organized with careful intention. Inside, Evelyn handed Rachel a blanket and pointed to a small folding seat. There was no pity in her movements, only practicality. She spoke about weather, about road conditions, about how hospitals never slept. The normal conversation grounded Rachel more than any advice could have. Eventually, Rachel talked. Not all of it, just enough. She said her marriage had ended badly. She said money was gone. She said she felt erased. Evelyn listened without interruption, eyes steady, hands folded. When Rachel finished, Evelyn nodded and said she had once lost everything too, but not all at once. That difference, she said, had saved her. They shared a simple meal from a paper bag, nothing special. Yet Rachel felt human again. Evelyn explained she lived on the road by choice now, after decades as a legal accounting assistant. She trusted systems more than people, she said, because systems always left records. That sentence settled deep in Rachel's chest. Records, evidence, paper trails. Evelyn spoke about mistakes people made when they believed they were untouchable. How arrogance created gaps. How silence allowed truth to wait patiently. Before dawn, Evelyn offered Rachel a place to stay for a few nights at a small campground outside the city. No obligation, no questions. Rachel hesitated, pride rising weakly, then accepted. Survival mattered more than pride. As the sky lightened, Rachel realized this kindness came without strings, without control. It was the opposite of everything Daniel had ever offered. When Evelyn started the engine, Rachel felt something unfamiliar grow inside her, stability. That night marked the first moment Rachel slept without fear, knowing nothing was demanded, nothing was taken, and nothing about her existence needed permission to remain in the fragile hours before sunrise returned. She did not know yet that this quiet generosity would become the foundation of her return. But as the van pulled onto the road, Rachel understood one thing clearly. Sometimes help arrives without warning, and sometimes it changes the direction of an entire life forever. Morning arrived quietly at the campground. Rachel sat at a picnic table while Evelyn brewed coffee on a small burner. Birds moved through the trees, unaware of the wreckage Rachel carried inside. For the first time in days, no one was rushing her, threatening her, or watching her. Evelyn spoke while pouring the coffee. She said men like Daniel always believed control meant intelligence. They rushed to secure power but ignored the evidence they created along the way. Bank timestamps, authorization logs, metadata. Systems remembered what people forgot. Rachel listened carefully. Something inside her aligned. She admitted she once handled their finances early in the marriage. She knew how Daniel thought. He trusted speed over caution and loyalty over verification. Evelyn nodded and said that confidence was expensive. They talked for hours. Evelyn explained how asset transfers worked, how shortcuts were taken when someone wanted secrecy, and how those shortcuts left trails. She warned Rachel not to confront anyone yet. Panic made liars destroy proof, but patience made them careless. Rachel felt shame surface again. She said she should have stopped him sooner. Evelyn shook her head and said survival was not stupidity. It was adaptation. Rachel realized she had been adapting for years, quietly learning without naming it. That afternoon, Rachel opened an old external drive she had kept from her workdays. Inside were archived emails, budget drafts, and scanned documents Daniel had once asked her to store temporarily. She'd forgotten them completely. Evelyn smiled faintly and said people always underestimated memory. Rachel's hands trembled as she scrolled. Dates appeared, versions overlapped, some files contradicted others, patterns emerged. This was not chaos. It was structure pretending to be invisible. Fear shifted into focus. For the first time since the morning her accounts vanished, Rachel felt capable. Not victorious, capable. She understood now that her role was not to accuse, but to observe. As the sun lowered, Evelyn placed a notebook beside her and said one sentence that sealed everything. She told Rachel that truth did not need anger to be lethal. It needed timing. Rachel closed the laptop and inhaled deeply. The game Daniel thought he had ended was only beginning, and he had no idea his own past was about to testify against him in full, in ways no court or lie could ever stop him completely, publicly, forever. Rachel spent the next 2 days buried in files, receipts, and forgotten backups. She worked slowly, methodically, the way she used to before life taught her to doubt herself. Each document told a fragment of a story Daniel believed had been erased. Together, they formed a pattern that could not be explained away. Evelyn showed her how to create timelines. Transfer dates overlapped with medical appointments Daniel claimed not to remember. Digital signatures appeared before approvals were legally possible. There were gaps where authorization should have existed and shortcuts only someone confident of secrecy would take. None of it screamed crime alone. Together, it whispered intent. Rachel felt exhaustion, but it was different now. Purpose replaced despair. She stopped thinking about what she had lost and focused on what remained provable. Every night, she backed up copies to separate drives, labeling them carefully. Evidence, like truth, needed protection. On the third evening, Rachel received a message from Daniel. It was brief, polite, almost warm. He asked if she was ready to sign and suggested they keep things amicable. The timing confirmed everything. He believed she was desperate. Rachel did not respond. Silence was no longer weakness. It was leverage. Evelyn warned her not to rush. She explained that people who felt secure revealed more over time. Rachel listened. She understood now that survival required restraint, not confrontation. She would let Daniel continue believing the story he had written. That night, Rachel stared at the campground fire and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Certainty. The truth had never vanished. It had simply waited for someone patient enough to gather it. She realized Daniel's greatest miscalculation was assuming she would collapse. Instead, he had stripped away distractions and left her with clarity. Nothing sharpened focus like betrayal. Rachel closed her notebook and whispered a vow. She would not expose the truth to hurt him. She would expose it to reclaim herself. And when the moment arrived, it would arrive cleanly, undeniably, and without mercy. She understood that every delay strengthened her position. Every unanswered message increased Daniel's confidence. and every quiet night allowed the evidence to mature into something impossible to dismiss, deny, minimize, reframe, or escape when exposed. The truth had survived years of silence, and it was ready to speak through her at exactly the wrong time for Daniel to finally hear. Rachel learned the truth about Vanessa by accident. While reviewing a series of bank statements, she noticed a recurring transfer leaving Vanessa's account late at night. The amounts were large, irregular, and always followed by short-term deposits from unknown lenders. Evelyn pointed it out quietly. This wasn't savings, it was debt management. Digging deeper, Rachel found collateral agreements tied to properties that technically belonged to Daniel, but were already leveraged elsewhere. Vanessa had been borrowing against assets she did not fully own. The sister who walked with confidence was drowning quietly, patching one hole with another. Rachel understood now why Vanessa needed everything moved into her name quickly. Vanessa was not protecting Daniel. She was protecting herself. The realization shifted the entire board. Daniel believed Vanessa was loyal because blood demanded it. He never considered that desperation rewrote loyalty faster than love ever could. Vanessa had used Daniel's fear of divorce to secure her own survival. The transfer wasn't just betrayal, it was leverage. Rachel felt no satisfaction, only clarity. This wasn't a family alliance. It was a collapsing structure held together by lies and urgency. And urgency always made mistakes. Evelyn explained how lenders reported inconsistencies, how pressure forced borrowers to cut corners, how one audit triggered another. Rachel listened, absorbing the implications. Vanessa's timeline was fragile. One disruption could unravel everything. That night, Rachel received an unexpected email forwarded from an old contact. It mentioned Vanessa by name, attached to a missed payment dispute. The sender didn't know Rachel was connected. The universe hadn't intervened. Vanessa had simply become sloppy. Rachel saved the file and closed her laptop. She finally understood the full shape of the threat against her and the weakness within it. Daniel thought he had transferred safety. In reality, he had concentrated risk. As rain fell outside the van, Rachel allowed herself one breath of grim relief. She didn't need revenge. She needed timing. And timing was no longer on Vanessa's side. She knew exposure too early would collapse the structure in unpredictable ways, harming her own case. Patience meant power now. Every hour Vanessa delayed payments tightened the trap, drawing attention closer, increasing scrutiny, and ensuring consequences would arrive without Rachel lifting her voice again. The sister who believed she had won everything was already standing on borrowed ground that was beginning to crack beneath her feet. Rachel replied to Daniel 2 days later with a single sentence. She said she was tired, scared, and ready to cooperate. She asked for a meeting to sign whatever was left. The message was simple, almost broken, exactly what he expected. Daniel responded within minutes. His tone softened, concern suddenly restored. He suggested lunch, neutral ground, no lawyers. Rachel agreed. She spent the morning practicing stillness, reminding herself that silence was now a tool, not a wound. At the restaurant, Daniel looked relieved. He spoke about closure, about peace, about moving forward respectfully. Rachel nodded, eyes down, shoulders rounded. She apologized for being difficult. She said stress had confused her. Each word tasted bitter, but she swallowed it. Daniel relaxed visibly. He ordered wine. He talked too much. He explained how transferring assets had protected everyone, how Vanessa was handling details temporarily. Rachel listened carefully, noting what he revealed when he felt safe. Confidence loosened his caution. He slid the divorce papers across the table and told her she was doing the right thing. Rachel signed slowly, deliberately, exactly where instructed. She did not argue. She did not ask questions. She let him believe the story was complete. What Daniel did not see was the calm beneath her submission. Rachel had already secured copies of every page. She knew which signatures mattered and which did not. She understood which agreements could be challenged and which could not survive scrutiny. After lunch, Daniel hugged her awkwardly and said he hoped she would be okay. Rachel smiled faintly and thanked him. As she walked away, she felt lighter, not defeated. The performance was over, and it had worked. That evening, Evelyn reviewed the signed documents and confirmed what Rachel already sensed. The signatures triggered timelines. The cooperation created assumptions. Daniel would stop watching. She knew patience would keep him careless. Every unanswered message, every quiet day, allowed false security to grow. Daniel believed control meant victory. Rachel now understood control was temporary, but consequences were permanent. Patient, and always arrived when arrogance felt safest, without warning or mercy at all times. Rachel lay awake that night, heart steady. She had given him exactly what he wanted, and in doing so, she had taken something far more valuable than money: time. Daniel believed the war was finished, unaware that Rachel had just secured the quiet conditions necessary for his complete and irreversible downfall. With the papers signed, Daniel vanished from Rachel's daily thoughts exactly as planned. He stopped checking on her, stopped asking questions, stopped pretending to care. Confidence made him careless, and carelessness created openings Rachel had been waiting for. Evelyn helped Rachel file a series of anonymous compliance reports, each small enough to seem routine. They referenced discrepancies, timing conflicts, and unusual asset movements tied to corporate structures Daniel once managed. Nothing accusatory, just enough to trigger quiet reviews. At the same time, Rachel sent one final message to Vanessa, thanking her for handling everything and wishing her luck with the responsibilities ahead. Vanessa replied with a smile emoji and a short reassurance. That response was logged, timestamped, and archived. It confirmed control and intent without suspicion. Days passed, then weeks. Rachel watched patterns change. Vanessa's accounts froze briefly, then reopened. Daniel complained publicly about delayed approvals, blaming bureaucracy. Rachel stayed invisible. One afternoon, an unfamiliar number called Evelyn's phone. It was a junior auditor asking procedural questions. Evelyn answered carefully, offering neutral clarification. Rachel listened, heart steady. The trap was working because no one inside it felt threatened yet. Daniel made his first mistake soon after. He moved funds between entities too quickly, trying to cover a delay Vanessa had caused. The transfer crossed jurisdictions. It flagged automatically. Rachel documented everything without reacting. By the time Daniel sensed pressure, it was already layered. Multiple departments, separate inquiries. Each small, reasonable, impossible to silence at once. Panic began quietly, disguised as irritation. Rachel felt no triumph, only distance. She understood now that destruction didn't arrive loudly. It arrived administratively, methodically, without villains or heroes, just consequences unfolding as designed. One evening, Daniel called her unexpectedly. His voice was tense but controlled. He asked if she had spoken to anyone. Rachel answered gently, confused, harmless. He relaxed slightly, thanked her, and hung up. Rachel closed her phone and exhaled. The moment had passed. The last chance for him to retreat was gone. Systems were awake, eyes were open, records were speaking. She understood that patience, documentation, and silence were weapons, sharpening themselves daily, requiring no force, no permission, and no mercy once released into the open worldwide inevitably. Daniel still believed he was managing a problem, never realizing he had become one. And that realization was about to cost him everything he thought he owned. Rachel discovered the final piece late one night while reviewing an old email archive she almost skipped. The folder was labeled Legacy Vendors, something Daniel once managed before their marriage stabilized. Inside were messages from a company that no longer existed, referencing reimbursement delays and altered expense records. Evelyn leaned closer, silent, already understanding the weight of what they were seeing. Years ago, Daniel had worked as a financial director for a private firm. He left suddenly, claiming restructuring. The emails told a different story. Funds had been redirected, approvals had been forged, internal concerns were quietly dismissed. Rachel remembered that period clearly now. Daniel had been anxious, controlling, and unusually generous afterward. Money had appeared without explanation. The company never pressed charges. They dissolved quietly, but records remained. Evelyn explained that unresolved financial misconduct did not expire when documentation resurfaced in the right context, especially when patterns repeated, especially when new investigations overlapped old ones. Rachel understood then why Daniel feared exposure more than divorce. His past was not clean. It was dormant. They traced the email headers, verified authenticity, and backed everything up twice. Rachel felt a chill run through her. This wasn't leverage, this was collapse. Daniel had built his confidence on the belief that time erased guilt. He assumed silence meant safety. He never imagined Rachel would remember, let alone preserve, the smallest fragments of his former life. Rachel did not feel joy. She felt certainty. This truth did not belong to her anger. It belonged to accountability. The next day, Daniel's name appeared quietly in an expanded inquiry notice connected to financial irregularities spanning more than a decade. No accusations yet, just questions. Enough to freeze movement. Enough to expose patterns. Daniel called again that evening. His voice was strained. He asked if she was okay, if she needed help. Rachel answered calmly, almost kindly. She said she was adjusting. She said she trusted things would resolve themselves. After the call, Rachel sat still, listening to the night settle. She understood now that Daniel's downfall would not come from revenge, confrontation, or emotion. It would come from history. The man who erased her believed the past was dead, never realizing it was only waiting for the right moment to breathe again and destroy everything he built. The first official notice arrived on a Monday morning. Daniel received it at work, not at home, which unsettled him immediately. It requested documentation related to asset transfers, prior employment records, and third-party authorizations. The language was neutral, but the implications were sharp. This was no longer routine. By noon, Vanessa was calling him repeatedly. Her voice, once confident, now cracked with urgency. A lender had frozen access. Another demanded clarification. She insisted it was temporary, yet panic leaked through every word. Daniel told her to calm down, but his own hands trembled as he closed his office door. Rachel watched everything from a distance. Evelyn monitored public filings and compliance updates, confirming what they already knew. The machinery had engaged. Once activated, it did not reverse quietly. Daniel attempted control. He contacted lawyers, accountants, anyone who would answer. Each conversation ended the same way. Requests were pending. Reviews were ongoing. Cooperation was advised. No one offered reassurance. That night, Daniel drove to the house Rachel once called home. He stood outside, staring at dark windows, realizing she was no longer there to confront, persuade, or intimidate. The absence unsettled him more than anger ever had. Vanessa sent a final message before midnight. She said she needed help. She said things were spiraling. Daniel did not reply. For the first time, he understood loyalty had limits. Rachel slept peacefully that night, not because she felt safe, but because she felt prepared. The fear that once ruled her had been replaced by inevitability. Consequences were moving forward without her effort. She knew this phase was the most dangerous. When people sensed collapse, they made reckless choices. She stayed invisible, unreachable, and patient. By morning, Daniel's accounts were partially restricted. His reputation began to shift quietly. Meetings were postponed, invitations withdrawn, the walls were closing in, brick by brick. Rachel reviewed her notes again, checking dates, names, and sequences, ensuring nothing relied on emotion. She reminded herself to avoid contact, avoid commentary, avoid satisfaction. Control now belonged to process, not people. Every document filed, every delay recorded, every silence maintained tightened the frame around Daniel, narrowing outcomes until resistance became impossible without mercy, without noise, without witnesses, without shortcuts, without hesitation or escape routes. Daniel still believed he could fix everything, unaware that the system no longer needed his permission to finish what he started. Daniel finally broke his silence. He showed up at Rachel's temporary mailing address, unannounced, eyes hollow, confidence gone. He spoke quickly, tripping over apologies that arrived too late to sound real. He said Vanessa had made mistakes. He said pressure forced bad decisions. He said he never meant for things to go this far. Rachel listened from the doorway, calm, distant, unmoved. She did not invite him in. She did not correct him. She allowed him to talk himself smaller with every sentence. Desperation always revealed truth faster than honesty. Daniel asked for help. He said they could fix things together, that loyalty still mattered. He reminded her of shared memories, of years that once felt safe. Rachel felt none of it land. Those memories no longer belonged to him. Behind the scenes, Vanessa's situation collapsed rapidly. Creditors filed claims. Investigators expanded their scope. One inconsistency exposed another. The web tightened because it was built on shortcuts, not foundations. Vanessa tried to shift blame to Daniel. Daniel tried to distance himself from Vanessa. The alliance dissolved instantly. Rachel received confirmation that both names were now formally linked within the same inquiry. Their attempt to divide liability had only unified it. Fear turned inward, feeding itself. Daniel returned again, this time angry. He accused Rachel of betrayal, of revenge, of destroying his life. She answered quietly that she had done nothing. That was the truth. His choices had spoken loudly enough on their own. That night, Rachel sat with Evelyn, reviewing the final updates. The outcome was no longer uncertain. Assets were frozen. Professional licenses were under review. Public consequences approached steadily. Rachel felt something unexpected then. Not triumph, not relief, closure. The chapter that once defined her pain was ending without her needing to rewrite it. She realized justice was rarely dramatic. It was procedural. It arrived slowly, then all at once. And when it did not ask how someone felt. She understood now that survival had reshaped her, stripping away fear, illusion, and dependence. What remained was clarity, discipline, and restraint. She was no longer reacting. She was witnessing consequences unfold, detached, steady, and ready to step forward only when the process was complete without hesitation or self-doubt. Daniel and Vanessa had reached the end of control, discovering too late that desperation only accelerates the fall it tries to escape. The courtroom was smaller than Rachel expected, almost ordinary. No drama, no raised voices, no grand speeches, just documents, timelines, and facts laid bare. Daniel sat at the opposite table, shoulders stiff, eyes hollow. Vanessa was not beside him. Her case had been separated after new evidence surfaced overnight. Rachel listened as the judge reviewed the findings: unauthorized transfers, intentional asset concealment, coordinated misrepresentation. Each phrase landed quietly, final and irreversible. Daniel's attorney tried to argue confusion, stress, misunderstanding. The judge did not interrupt. He waited until the excuses ended, then spoke with calm precision. The ruling came without hesitation. The asset transfers were declared fraudulent. The divorce agreement was invalidated. All shared property was ordered to be returned to Rachel, along with compensation for damages and legal costs. Additional matters were referred for criminal review. The gavel struck once. Daniel exhaled sharply as if punched. For the first time, he looked directly at Rachel. Not with anger, with disbelief. He had truly believed she would disappear quietly. That belief had been his final mistake. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, drawn by whispers of a broader investigation. Rachel walked past them without comment. Her victory was not meant for spectacle. It was meant for restoration. Later that afternoon, Rachel sat alone in a quiet park, paperwork resting beside her. She felt lighter, not because she had won, but because the lie had ended. Her life was no longer defined by someone else's control. She thought of the woman she had been at the kitchen table weeks ago, staring at an empty account. That version of herself felt distant now, almost unfamiliar. Pain had forced growth. Silence had become strategy. Patience had become power. Justice had not arrived as revenge. It arrived as balance. Rachel closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The fight was over. What remained was the future, unclaimed and finally hers to choose, without fear, permission, or apology for surviving. It did not feel like an ending, but a beginning shaped by hard lessons, earned dignity, and a quiet strength she never knew she possessed, ready to rebuild her life deliberately, surround herself with honesty, protect her boundaries fiercely, and move forward without looking back, knowing the cost of silence, the value of truth, and the power of choosing herself at last after years of manipulation, finally ended forever without regret today. Rachel was offered something unexpected after the ruling. Through attorneys and quiet intermediaries, Daniel asked for forgiveness. Not publicly, not dramatically, but desperately. He wanted a statement, a softened narrative, something to lessen the damage that was still spreading through his professional life. Rachel declined. She did not speak to him, nor to Vanessa. She instructed her lawyers to communicate only what was legally required. Forgiveness, she understood now, was personal. Accountability was not optional. What Daniel faced was not her punishment. It was consequence. Vanessa's situation worsened quickly. Evidence linked her to multiple fraudulent loans and intentional misrepresentation. The assets she once flaunted were seized. The confidence that once filled her voice vanished. She was no longer protected by family or secrecy. Rachel felt no pleasure watching the collapse, only distance. She recognized the pattern clearly now. People who built safety through manipulation always believed mercy would save them. They mistook kindness for weakness. In private moments, Rachel allowed herself grief, not for Daniel, but for the years she had given without protection. She mourned the woman who believed endurance was love. Letting go of that belief was painful but necessary. She met with Mark again, slowly rebuilding trust. She told him the truth without bitterness. He listened. He apologized. Healing began carefully, honestly, without pressure. Rachel chose not to pursue maximum penalties where discretion existed. Not out of pity, but clarity. She wanted closure, not control. Justice had already spoken loudly enough. As she signed final documents restoring her assets, Rachel understood something essential. Mercy did not mean erasing memory. It meant refusing to carry hatred forward. Her future would not be built on revenge, but on boundaries, awareness, and self-respect. The past had taken enough. Rachel walked away intact, restored, and awake. Daniel and Vanessa would live with the weight of their choices. She would live with freedom. That balance was enough. It was a future she would shape deliberately, guided by caution, empathy, and strength earned the hard way. Every step forward honored survival, not suffering. She would build stability, help others escape silence, and protect herself fiercely. The story ended fairly, not kindly, proving that justice does not require cruelty to feel complete. It closed a chapter, opened another, and reminded anyone watching that dignity, patience, and truth eventually return what was stolen from lives shattered by deliberate betrayal. Rachel moved into a small sunlit apartment overlooking a public garden, choosing simplicity over display. The furniture was modest, the rooms quiet, but every decision belonged to her. She reopened accounts in her own name, rebuilt credit carefully, and scheduled treatments without asking permission. Stability returned step by deliberate step. With guidance from Evelyn, Rachel invested part of her settlement into a non-profit clinic supporting victims of financial abuse. It began as a weekly consultation hour and grew into something larger. Women arrived carrying fear Rachel recognized instantly. She listened, offered resources, and showed them records could protect dignity. Each story strengthened her resolve. Rachel also returned to work, accepting a position coordinating compliance for a regional firm. Her skills resurfaced quickly. Colleagues valued her precision and calm. For the first time in years, she felt respected for what she knew, not for what she endured. Work became purpose, not escape. Her health improved slowly. Treatment was tiring but consistent. She learned to pace herself, to rest without guilt, to ask for help without apology. Mark visited often, helping with errands and sharing quiet meals. Trust rebuilt through honesty, patience, and time. One afternoon, Rachel received a handwritten note from a woman she had helped months earlier. It said, "Your courage reminded me I am not broken." Rachel folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of why she kept going. She never followed Daniel's case after sentencing. She did not need updates to feel closure. Consequences had arrived. Her attention belonged to the life ahead. On evenings when doubt surfaced, Rachel walked the garden path below her apartment, watching strangers pass with their own unseen struggles. She felt connected, grounded, present. Survival had taught her boundaries. Justice had taught her worth. Rachel understood reward was not excess. It was choice, safety, and quiet mornings without fear. She had earned a life defined by clarity, compassion, and control over her own future. She locked her door each night knowing it protected something real. Freedom was no longer an idea. It was practice, daily, sustained, and deeply hers. Tomorrow felt open and ordinary, which pleased her most because healing did not need fireworks, only consistency, honesty, and time to let a once silenced voice speak clearly again with courage, patience, and steady faith forward together. Years later, Rachel often thought about how loudly pain had once dominated her life and how softly peace arrived afterward. There was no single moment when everything felt healed. Instead, healing showed up in ordinary details. Morning light through open curtains, bills paid without fear, laughter that came easily without calculation. The nonprofit had grown into a recognized resource. Rachel never called herself a savior. She called herself proof. Proof that erasure was not permanent. Proof that silence did not mean weakness. Women came to her broken, ashamed, convinced they had failed. Rachel showed them documents, timelines, options. More importantly, she showed them they were still whole. Evelyn remained by her side, no longer living on the road. They shared quiet dinners, long conversations, and an understanding built without obligation. Their bond was not dramatic. It was steady. Mutual respect replaced dependence. Together they built something lasting. Rachel never spoke publicly about Daniel or Vanessa. Their names belonged to a closed chapter. She learned that peace did not require explanation. It required boundaries. When people asked how she survived, she answered simply. She told them she stayed curious, patient, and honest with herself. On the anniversary of the ruling, Rachel returned to the park near the courthouse. She sat on the same bench, watching leaves fall. She felt gratitude, not for suffering, but for resilience. Pain had sharpened her values. Loss had clarified her priorities. Rachel no longer feared being alone. Solitude felt safe now. She trusted her instincts again. That trust was her greatest reward. As evening settled, Rachel stood and walked home, keys warm in her hand. She opened her door, stepped inside, and closed it behind her. The quiet welcomed her. Her life was not perfect. It was real, earned, balanced, and that was enough. She had been erased once, deliberately and cruelly. Now she lived visibly, honestly, and free. The storm had passed. What remained was strength, compassion, and a future built not on revenge but on truth. In that truth, Rachel found lasting peace, knowing justice had been served, lessons learned, and her story would quietly inspire others long after the noise faded away forever.